Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of the Indieheads podcast. This will be episode 1 of a new series of podcasts that we're doing called Indieheads Retrospect, where essentially it'll be two of us, or there'll be two members, a member, maybe just some random person. Which I mentioned that as the first episode of the series Retrospect. Basically, we're going to be talking about albums that we really love, albums that maybe they wouldn't fit into a normal podcast that we could talk about. So essentially, this is just sort of our opportunity to talk about albums that we really love that we can't really do like a full in-depth discussion on the podcast about. And so the first episode of which is about my personal favorite album of all time, Dean Blunt's The Redeemer. And I'm very happy to have a special guest for this podcast. If you want to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so my name is Armando. I go by Semi-Interesting on Twitter, Instagram, all that stuff. And I've known Matt for a while. We kind of met each other on the internet because we were both Dean Blunt stans. And he hit me up to do this, and I'm very excited.
Yeah, and we are doing this podcast as I'm pretty sure today marks the 5-year anniversary of the release of The Redeemer by Dean Blunt, and which is very exciting. And I've been wanting to do something in retrospect for this album for a few months now, pretty much since the beginning of this year. I've been wanting to do something. I've just been like trying to like go over in my head like what do I want to do, because it's like I already have done like plenty of written stuff about Dean Blunt. I already did the little FYC video 2 years ago, and so it made sense like, hey, let's do a podcast and actually like let me talk about this album with someone who kind of understands it like I do. Because most of the members of the Indieheads podcast, there's some who that say they like it, but it's hard to have a conversation about it because they just don't get it like I do, or they just stuff. It's just, again, I love this album a lot, and I'm very excited to talk about it. And I guess we'll start this podcast. I want to give like a warning. If you've never listened to this album, pause this podcast and go listen to the album right now. Because I feel like it if especially if you know nothing about Dean Blunt, like go into this album as blind as you possibly can, because that's how I went into the album for the first time. I went in almost completely blind, didn't know who Dean Blunt was, just randomly searched him on Spotify, listened to this album, fell in love with it, because I feel like if you know too much about Dean Blunt, there's going to be some stuff in this album that feels a bit tainted. So go in as blind as you can. Yeah. This is your spoiler warning. So from here on out, this is for the real heads only. So yeah, I mentioned all that stuff because looking at the critical reception at the time of this album, there was a lot of people who like just didn't really get it. They were just like, is he being genuine? Is this serious? Like, what's his deal on this album? Because prior to this, you probably know the Hype Williams history better than I do, but essentially it comes down to like Dean Blunt. He was a bit of a trickster. He was a bit of a prankster in the media. Yeah, he kind of liked to fuck around a lot with the media and his own music, and so a lot of people just didn't really know when this album came out. They just didn't know how to receive this album.
And I mean he still does that to this day. Dean Blunt has always kind of been sort of joking, and you can't really tell when he's genuine or not. And I mean, unfortunately, I didn't go into this album blind. I mean, I still love the album, and I think it's fantastic, but I heard about Dean Blunt through Hype Williams. So I heard about his stuff with Inga Copeland, and then I didn't know he did solo stuff. So one day I was kind of on Tumblr, and I saw one of my friends like repost a song from The Redeemer. It was Poppy, which samples Echoes, and we'll get into all that later on. But I heard it, and I was kind of blown away by it. So from that, I went from Hype Williams to Dean Blunt, and the first time I heard it, I immediately fell in love with it.
Very similar reaction with me. I think it was like a random day for me in fall 2015. It's gonna sound embarrassing, but I remembered like Anthony Fantano's like black metal review for whatever reason, and I was just like, hey, I guess Dean Blunt, that's on my mind, I'm gonna go listen to it. Like, I don't even know why exactly. I still don't remember why. It's just something compelled me to type in Dean Blunt on Spotify, than listen to Redeemer and black metal and just be like, oh, that's like, this is my guy. Like, for first listen,
Yeah.
just for listen, just again, I was just instantly compelled because it just came out at a very like unique time in my life where I was sort of still dealing with like a really bad breakup and just trying to like figure out my headspace. And I feel like this album, in
Yeah.
a lot of ways, helped out with that. But now I'm,
Well, to me, yeah, it's like the quintessential breakup album. Like when I first heard it, that's kind of the vibe I got from it. You have these little vignettes of like voicemail messages and all these like lyrics, and it kind of sets you through all the stages of a breakup. I would say, you still have that small hope of still having a connection with that person, but then, that connection might turn sour. And then at the very end, it's almost like a vengeful end where he's like, oh, feeling like that you can move on and that this person, and because of this relationship, it's now over and you move on.
mhm. Yeah, especially brutal is the track you're talking about is it's very at the time, of course, I related. I'm like, yeah, I can go on and be better. And of course, now in like with a bit of retrospect and going through a few more relationships, it's much more sadder and like really pathetic, but like in a way
Yes.
that's very relatable. But
Yes.
we'll kind of get into that. Um, but yeah, this album, God. I guess we'll just kind of start from the top. There's a lot of samples on this
Yep.
album, and a lot of really well done samples. I think another thing that was a really helpful part about going in blind was that I didn't recognize a lot of the samples on this album, and so like it's hard to listen to the samples. Go like, oh my god, he flipped it that way, or like he didn't really do anything, but basically
Yeah.
made it his own. Like the intro track, "I Run New York," it's literally just like ripping like the first like 30 seconds off of like a JoJo. Hang on a second, I gotta pull up the whole who sampled page.
Yeah.
Like like
It's a pretty lengthy one too, so
let me see. Hang on. Who sampled? It ain't helping. You ain't helping. Who sampled.com. I'm trying to get to the track that I wanna talk about. Okay, I can't find it for some. It was like JoJo and oh yeah, oh Casey and JoJo. Okay, it's right there. I was just like
yeah.
ignoring it. It's literally takes like the first like 36 seconds from it, and then it, like listening to the Casey and JoJo track, it's so bizarre now because you have this like really beautiful like lush like string arrangement, and then the rest of that Casey and JoJo track, it's just kind of like standard R&B for the time, like the late 90s, like the breaking out
Yeah.
like Casio keyboards and like drum machines, and it's like what how say what? And so Dean kind of does it a lot with some of the songs on this album, was like just taking these samples and like completely repurposing them to the point where it's like, oh, like you listen to the original songs, you're just like, how, how did he make this into this and make me feel this way using this?
Yeah. It's kind of a thing across the whole album and all his other stuff too. The first time I heard it, the one sample, I only recognized one sample, and that was the Echoes sample, where he loops like, I want to say 10 seconds of this. I mean, if you're familiar with Echoes and Pink Floyd, this is like a 20-30 minute song, and he samples 30 seconds of it, and then loops it into a 2 minute beautiful kind of uh, slow R&B rap track.
Mm-hmm. And I think another reason I was talking about like people not taking this album seriously is that it's pretty awesome. Like with the timing of the release, it's sort of in some ways kind of inspired by sort of the emerging sort of new R&B movement happening at the time, kind of which kind of launched with 808s and Heartbreak, and then kind of continued with like The Weeknd, Frank Ocean, Drake. And I feel like this album in some ways is kind of it. I think it could very easily be interpreted as like taking the piss out of that style, but I feel like it's also sort of a throwback to sort of like older chamber pop records, like an influence, and like in retrospect was like, oh damn, this guy, like he's like Dean's very inspired by like someone like Scott Walker on this album, especially
Yeah.
like his early solo work, the Scott 1 through 4 albums, like just
Hmm.
all the just beautiful string arrangements on that album, and how it's sort of he's doing a lot of some like there's a lot of strings work on this album. Some of it sampled, some of it it sounds like it's done in like on a computer. Maybe you can kind of have
Yeah.
better insight on that.
Yeah, so I feel that I think his kind of MO for not even just this album, but most of his stuff is that he'll repurpose like these weird commercially like successful songs and he'll kind of make them his own weird like almost Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type creation where it's like his own like instrumentation, but then he'll either cut it halfway or he'll loop something else with his own thing and it makes this weird sort of creation that only he could think of.
Mm-hmm. Like the sample on the Redeemer title track, the "Oh Daddy" sample from Fleetwood Mac, still
Yeah.
fucking blows my mind to this day. Like, it's again, he samples this small section of the song, but like is able to build it out for like 3 minutes, and it's just incredible.
Yeah.
And then the Puff Daddy sample, which is
What am I doing now?
what the fuck I'm gonna do now,
It's
and
all fucked up. Yeah.
is it's fucking great because again it's sort of him just like on Puff Daddy, it's just him like flexing like, oh yeah, what the fuck
Yeah.
I'm gonna do now, like acting all
Yeah.
gangster. And it's also a bit of a throwback to the Narcissist too, with all the all the some of the samples on there from the was it like an Ashanti music video or something like that?
Yeah, yes. Yeah, he likes to play around with like a lot of early 2000s hip hop, R&B like culture. I mean, or 90s, 2000s.
I think the most obvious example, the Craig David sample, this makes me proud to be
Makes me
British,
proud to be British.
sampled
Yeah.
5 minutes in a row on
Yeah.
Baby Father, which is just, oh my god.
And also in black metal where he repurposes French Montana lyrics on Molly and Aquafina. Like the whole chorus is the chorus to Worried About Nothing by French Montana.
But
Okay.
yeah, the French Montana, again, just Blunt is, again, Dean, if there's anything you take away from this podcast, Dean Blunt is a fucking genius, but also one
Yeah.
that I don't always understand what he's doing. Like, I feel like there's some times with some of his stuff where I'm just like, what is he doing? Like, even
Yeah.
I find myself kind of confounded by him sometimes, especially some of his
But that's what keeps me coming back to him.
it's a bit of a Stockholm syndrome relationship at times.
Yeah.
I think.
Yeah.
Just,
I Yeah, and it's like all his stuff, and he just doesn't do this with, music. He's done this with art exhibits. He does a bunch of stunts. I think the best stunt that he's ever done was he won an award at the NME Awards show, and he got his bodyguard to accept the award on his behalf. And most people didn't know that that wasn't Dean Blunt. And it's still one of those things where it's like, I'm going to fuck with you guys again, and I'm still going to do whatever I want, but yet you're still going to like it.
Exactly.
And I can do whatever.
It's the stuff outside the music that I don't mind. Like, I feel like that's the more funny stuff. It's just when it starts to bleed into the music. For the most part, I can stomach it, and I do think it does turn out to be great music. But there's sometimes, like, I think some of the Baby Father stuff is
Yeah.
it's polarizing to say the least. It's kind of polarizing. Because
Yeah,
I do love
if you're going to get into Dean Blunt, I think the Baby Father stuff, or even the Hype Williams stuff, should be the last thing you check out. Like, once you're, like, fully sold on this guy.
Mm-hmm. Because
I don't know if you agree with that. Or
I would agree, because almost everything he's done solo has been relatively, like, easily consumable in compared to his other
Yeah.
stuff. Like, Hype Williams is very like, it's really lo-fi. Like, you
Yeah.
think about some lo-fi electronic music, like, that is just like, it sounds like it sounds fucking terrible. Like,
Yeah,
the music
yeah,
is good,
if
but
you're
it
like
sounds
an
terrible.
audiophile, yeah, you don't really look for this for a lot of signature. If you're a music major or something like that, you might be a little pissed off by it, but
Yeah.
it's still a fantastic thing to look into.
Mm-hmm. But we're talking about all the pranks one. Again, you could talk about all the incidents and shit that he's pulled for so goddamn long because he's done so much.
Yeah.
And I feel like I feel like Dean is one of the artists of this like current generation that understands the internet and the current like music press cycle so much better than so many other people. Like right now we're kind of
Absolutely.
we're the whole whatever the fuck is happening with Kanye West. Like, it just, like, I'm just so tired of it. 'Cause it's
Yeah,
like, I've dealt with this before with so many other artists that it's like, this bores me. Like, shut
yeah.
up.
I've said this in the past, and I guess it's even truer now. I've always said that Dean Blunt is a better Kanye West.
Oh yeah.
And I say that because he kind of has the same like intentions with his art, or I mean, with his music, it's a little harder to tell, but when you really see his publicity stunts and the way he performs live, or even interviews with him, he kind of has the same ethos that Kanye does, but it's done in a much more subtle way, in a way where you kind of think about it, and it's like, therefore, to me, it's more impactful rather than Kanye just doing this crazy shit and everyone just kind of taking it at face value, because you can't do that with Dean.
No, absolutely not. Like, there's almost always some kind of there's meaning behind it. It's not just just being outlandish for the sake of it. There usually is some kind of deeper meaning behind what he's doing. Sometimes you never really figure it out, but you just know that, like, you trust Dean, that, like, okay, he's not
Yes.
just doing this to fuck with people. He's like, there's something behind this. But let's get back to
There's
the
a
album.
reason.
There's a reason.
Yeah.
But let's get into the album. We barely talked about the album. As we mentioned, I Run New York, again, Casey and JoJo sample. Again, a really, despite the fact that it literally just lifts it directly, no changes whatsoever, it's still a great, like, still probably uses it better than Casey and JoJo did, because it just fits.
Yes.
It's a great mood setter for the album, which leads into the first track, The Pedigree, which is, again, just great drum work. The strings sound great. Again, and it sort of establishes, like, what the album is about. It's about a breakup. So it's taking you from the beginning of the breakup, pretty much. And I mean, the album is generally non-chronological. Like, it sort of goes back and forth between, like, before breakup, after breakup, during, etc., etc. But The Pedigree is very squarely in front.
It's set between, like, these voicemail messages that come in and out of the album. So you'll have these, like, segments where, you'll have lyrics, like in The Pedigree, where it's like, happy we can still be friends, call me when your heart is empty. But then you'll have a voicemail message that'll be like, hey, could you stop calling me? And, so you'll have these, like, different segments of a breakup.
Mm-hmm. And what I do like about this album is that you do get sort of an all sides approach at times with it. Like, it's not just Dean Blunt, like, going and moaning on about his breakup. You are getting, like, kind of all sides of the tale here that really do on more and more listens, you do kind of see that Blunt's character on this album is it's honestly kind of at times very pathetic, but that's kind of why that's why I relate to it, and that's why I love it so much.
Of course,
it's pathetic, but it's very compelling. It's just,
and it's realistic.
Exactly, and
it's
lyrics,
grounded.
Mm-hmm. And he does it with so little, like, details. Like, some of the lyrics on this album, they're not like, it's not complex metaphors or like Sun-Kill Moon, like, extreme stream of consciousness. It's like, again, I think Blunt is just, as a lyricist, sort of a master at making do with as little as possible, where he's able to, with the music and with his voice, he's able to set the tale very well. Like, he's able to sort of go, okay, this is what this album is about, this is what I'm trying to do, these are the emotions I'm trying to get across. Just does it very simply. And even more impressive with his voice, too, is his voice is, like, it's this very, like, kind of deadpan baritone. But at least on this album, he does sort of kind of, get into the falsetto a little bit, not, like, embarrassingly, but you do actually feel like, oh, there's some emotion behind this. It's mostly deadpan, but you do, it's more of a deadpan that is, that represents, like, more of an emotional emptiness rather than, like, not caring.
And you still have the classic, one of his trademarks, well, the classic, like, break, where he'll just say, like, a verse and then kind of ended with, like, a or, something like that. And then he'll go right back into the deadpan flow that he's kind of known for.
Mm-hmm. So many yeahs on this album, too, which I think is probably the most taking a piss at Drake, probably. Because I think, have you seen that video that's, like, that compiles all of Drake's, like, yeahs from views?
Yes.
I feel like either probably I need to do that for this album because there's a lot of yas on this album, which I think works. It works very well, but it's very much like it's probably
Yeah,
the biggest like example of like okay, he's kind of taking the piss out of like some of these artists. He doesn't really do that on like any of his other albums. Like this is like the only one where you hear it constantly.
yeah, he kind of makes fun of like some ad libs in Baby Father, or like, but you get a lot of that mainly through the other people in Baby Father, not really Dean himself. You know, you get that a lot through DJ Escrow because
Mm-hmm.
he's kind of like a larger than life DJ character that you just, you kind of hear him and it's like, all right, man, I guess.
Yeah, which again, I feel like this album and even like BBF is like kind of similar in that like DJ Escrows is very like very sad, compelling character because there's some things he tries to do. He's like it's kind of pathetic in a way, but obviously
Yes,
like very
exactly.
different kinds of pathetic. As this is sort of DJ
Yeah.
Escrows just like pathetic because he's trying to be like this hot shot DJ who wants to be like a
It's the
rapper one
fragile
day.
masculinity type,
Exactly, which is actually a theme on this album that has stood out a bit more as I've kind of grown up a little bit. Is that this album at times he has like very sort of this fragile masculinity and sort of at times toxic masculinity to it,
Yeah. I think
which
that's a good segue into the next track, Demon,
mhm,
with Joanne Robertson, because I feel that that track really encompasses the whole like toxic masculinity aspect of this album.
exactly, and the Kate Bush sample with those drums is
Yeah.
so fucking good. And again,
Oh,
we're gonna
yes.
yell about it a lot, but like goddamn he knows how to sample somebody. Like Black Metal's also
Yeah.
has a ton of those where it's like, that's such a good
Yeah.
sample. Like, how the fuck did he do that? And this album
Yeah, and
is
it's like
pretty. Ah,
you don't realize the sample at the first time, and then you kind of look back at it or you look it up or something, and you're just like, how the fuck did he pull that off?
exactly. And this song again, like I said, it's as you were mentioning again, sort of that the toxic masculinity thing. As it's one of the heavier songs on the album with those like really the Kate Bush drums, which are like very pounding and heavy, and
Yeah.
the strings are a bit more darker on the song, and like so the mentions of stuff like guns over there, money over there,
Yeah.
bombs in there. It's like it's sort of a precursor in a lot of ways to like the character that he plays on the Baby Father albums, sort of this tough toting gangster with
Yeah.
a soft heart.
Yeah, and there's also samples of glass breaking and like car alarms and all this like crazy stuff that kind of um is in the middle of the track. It kind of takes you by surprise the first time you listen to it.
The car alarms especially kind of throw you off a little
Yeah.
bit because I mean I'm used to it now, but I imagine like if I listen to this album for the first time while I was driving, I'd be freaked out. Like
Oh yeah.
I know this album front to back now, but because I mean I occasionally like it's like a perfect like the album is like a perfect length for like my drives home from like St. Louis.
Yeah.
So, but again, if it, like my first time, I would be freaking out about like the glass breaking and the car alarms. Like, what the fuck is happening? Like, what's going on? Is there some crazy
Yeah,
shit
is
behind
someone
me?
trying to break into my car right now while I'm in it?
And then the robot voice, the sort of the computerized voice on here.
Yeah.
You
What you
know,
did was wrong.
hmm and seeing a horse about today, which uh, he saw a horse, and I don't know if that. I
Yeah, there's a lot of cryptic stuff to it.
And then Joanne Robertson, who does a lot of incredible vocal work on this album, and I highly recommend the collab album that she did with Dean Blunt that came out
Yeah.
last year, but it was like done back in like 2014. It's also fantastic, and if you really miss the sound that he did on Black Metal and this album to an extent, like go listen to that collab album. It's sort of it's like like I miss
Yeah.
this sound a little bit, but
Her solo stuff is also phenomenal. Black Moon Days is an incredible album. Came out a couple of years ago, maybe 2014, 2015. And it's very, very great, just somber classic folk music. And it's just another album that I just love front to back, especially if you're in a mood for kind of like um, more laid back music than
hmm
this.
hmm And yeah, but yeah, again, her work. I gotta check out more of her solo work because her work on Blunt stuff is almost always incredible. Like they work
Yeah.
super well together. And as I was mentioning, sure, they get the all sides thing with her singing. You get sort of her perspective, and
Hmm.
a little bit. Again, it's still kind of cryptic. It's still kind of vague, but you get the emotions across that hey, like what the fuck are you doing, dude? Like what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
there's sort of
Take a
this.
break, take it easy.
Hmm. And the sort of the whole I'll come home early next week is like really ominous. It's sort of
Yeah.
it's ominous in a way. It's like, well, is this going to be like the final breakup, or is this going to be something like worse than that from sort of some of the violence sort of implied in this song and more explicitly
Totally.
said. But again, incredible track, and that sort of leads into one of the many like instrumental sections on this album. Which the next one's there's two after this. It's like, well, actually, it's just one, and then like I think it's a voicemail afterwards.
Yeah, it's a
Uh,
voicemail.
and then Flaxen is just this really great instrumental track. Again, these really great sort of like choral vocals and this really sort of this sparkling sort of string loop that keeps playing, and it's just a really beautifully put together track that sort of allows you to sort of emotionally decompress a little bit after the first two tracks. Which this album is
Yeah.
it's perfectly paced. Like it really does give you time to sort of
Yes.
think about everything. Because I feel like with some breakup albums, it's just boom, 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 boom. Like it's just it's
Yeah.
like it's overwhelming at times with some albums. So I feel like this album it spaces stuff out where it gives you time to think about things a little bit and sort of reflect.
Yeah. Yeah, these tracks do symbolize kind of like how someone feels when they're by themselves. This is almost like Dean being in his room thinking about how it was when like the person he was seeing was with him, but now he's completely alone, and it's sort of him digesting what it's like to be single again, or what it's like to not have this person in your life anymore. And these instrumental tracks kind of paint a picture of what that mood feels like, I think, really well.
Exactly. And leads into the first Flax leads into the first voicemail of the album that are sort of transitional pieces as we kind of see again more of the other side of this relationship and seeing how it kind of falls apart. Where
Yeah.
with this one, it's her calling him and kind of being like, "Hey, it's still like at this point, it's still sort of the relationship. It's falling apart, but it's not. The final piece hasn't been sort of cracked just yet. It's still kind of together, but it's almost over." And
Yeah, it's
so,
definitely falling apart.
and you can barely understand what she's saying throughout it. It's very sort of distorted. Like most like kind of sort of like old voicemails, it's sort of hard to piece together what she's saying. But you can piece together enough words that hey, nothing. This is not a good voicemail. Like hey, this is not fun. And there's also just
Yeah.
some really I think is it on this track too that there's also like some more like sort of string instrumentals that sound really fantastic, or like some acoustic guitar
Yeah,
work.
I think oh no, no, no. I'm thinking of the one, I think it's Y3 with like the chorus in the background
Mm,
of the voicemail. But I think here it's just strings.
mm-hmm. And then it leads into the Redeemer, which is okay. I would say it's my favorite track on the album, but again, I feel like that's sort of hard to say because I think Brutal is probably my favorite, which we'll get to.
Yeah, Brutal is my favorite track.
It's
But The Redeemer is also a fantastic track.
and it's co-produced by Arca of all people,
Woo.
which is shocking because it doesn't really sound like he doesn't really have it like his like on the stuff with Baby Father. You can kind of tell that like oh yeah, Arca produced this. Like his fingerprints are all over it.
Oh yeah.
But like this is more like sort of his earlier work where he's still kind of figuring out his sound a bit. So his influence is not as like it's not as over encompassing as it was on
Yeah,
as it would be later on and stuff like his work with Bjork and again Baby
yeah.
Father.
The weird thing is he did work as like an executive producer on this album. He did, but like you said, it's not as distinct as it would be. But yet he still worked very closely with it. I remember reading that, and I was just like, "What? Like, where the hell was he this whole time?" You know?
And as still like it's still a weird combination, even though like, it makes sense because they probably run the same circles. Because like Arca, he's been based out of London occasionally, and so it's like, of
Mm-hmm.
course, they're gonna run to the same sort of art circles. But still, it's like, seeing Arca, like he works with like Bjork and like Kanye West and Kalela and all these
Yep.
other artists, and it's like, but he's also working with like Dean Blunt, who again, at least like, when it comes to the American press, is like the American press does not want to touch Dean Blunt except for maybe like Tiny Mixtapes, which I don't. I think
Yeah.
Tiny Mixtapes is Tiny Mixtapes based out of the U.S. or is this? I mean, it's basically like all over at this
It's
point.
all over. Yeah, I think you have like a bunch of freelance guys who live in different parts.
hmm So, but this Redeemer track, which samples the Oh Daddy by Fleetwood Mac, so good. And then it's Inga Copeland's only appearance on this album, which there are rumors and people try to piece together like who this album is about, and a lot of people have sort of implied that it's about Inga, which is,
Yeah.
I can buy into it to an extent because again, we still don't really know like what like besides being in a group together, like what their relationship outside of their music was.
Yeah.
Because in an interview that it was out around the time this album came out, I think it was like with Fact Magazine. It's cryptic as usual because Blunt he's a dick. I love him, but
Yeah.
he's such a dick, and I love it. But there was like a really like interesting bit of information in there, like a very like slight moment of vulnerability, where he said that the only person's opinion, like the only opinion that mattered was Inga's, and
Mm.
that was sort of around the time that Hype Williams broke up, and so it's sort of her being on the album is sort of a weird thing of like, was this made before? Like, was this like were her vocals repurposed? Like, did he ask
Yeah,
her to do this or?
or was it not about her at all? It's still up for debate, I would say.
Yeah, but again, her vocals on this sound amazing, and
Yes.
I will recommend, by the way, check out her solo work, especially some of the recent stuff she's done
Yeah.
as Lolina. I think she put out a new album this
Hmm.
year called The Smoke, I want to say,
Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
which is really good. And then the Live in Paris album was one of the most underrated albums of like 2016. Super
Yeah.
amazing, and her vocals on this
Also,
album is great.
Because I'm Worth It is a phenomenal EP thing that she released as Copeland. So another thing, it features actress on it, and it's just really, really powerful stuff too.
hmm But vocals on here, it's probably the best up until maybe, I mean, probably the best she's ever sounded vocally,
Hmm.
because obviously with like a lot of the Hype Williams stuff, it was obviously like super lo-fi, sort of hard to,
Distorted.
distorted, very sort of hazy at
Yes.
times, and this is a bit more. It's clear. Her voice is very clear, and it's to the front, and stuff like bring us closer now, God forsake us now, the only embrace, and this album. There's also some religious themes spread out throughout the album that are that I never really got like fully into.
I mean, look at the cover.
Yeah,
It's two hands praying, so
exactly.
it's still, yeah.
But the religious stuff, I haven't really dug deep into it enough, and because it's sort of the lyrics are sort of, there's only so much you can kind of pick out from the lyrics that some of the more religious aspects are a bit harder to grasp at, but they do show up and they are apparent on some songs. Not as much on this song, but besides the whole, okay, they are apparent, but then again to Blunt's verse, where this city brings us down.
Just,
Like, I love
yeah.
that intro, and it sort of paints this very ominous, almost even post-apocalyptic sort of picture, or sort of a dreamlike state of like, sort of this relationship is falling apart, and we kind of, it's like it's time to wake up and
Yeah.
realize like we can't save this. And of course, in the Puff Daddy sample, which again repurposed beautifully, where it again sort of ties into the sort of the toxic masculinity, toxic
Yeah.
just atmosphere that this relationship kind of has. And
Yeah. What am I gonna do now? It's all fucked up. It's just like all this like violent aggression over something that shouldn't
mhm,
happen.
exactly. And then this track leads into another instrumental, which I think this is if I remember correctly, this is the one, Seven Seals of Affirmation. It's the one with the Father Protect Me lyrics and all the sort of the water the field recordings
Yeah,
of the ocean, which again,
yeah,
let me remind you guys, the instrumental stuff on this album is incredible because a lot of instrumentals on a lot of albums, they're sort of just, it's sort of like a filler tracks or just like transitional tracks, and this one it just feels like they feel like they have much more of a purpose because it's like it allows you just, hey, think about this stuff a little bit, like decompress, like
yeah.
how does this, it allows me to reflect and kind of, because the lyrics on this album are so kind of they're so simple and they're so sort of easily digestible that you can kind of you can put together like your own life experiences into what he's talking about, and I feel like these instrumentals
Totally.
allow you to kind of think about the album and allow you those moments to go, how does this tie into my own life and my own experiences?
It
And
almost feels like he's walking down like a beach or something, and he's to himself just thinking about everything that has led up to this moment, and this is another time where he's reflecting, and it's just almost like he's almost starting to become at peace with what has happened.
mhm. And then again, it leads perfectly into Walls of Jericho, which I think is actually the track with the Father Protect Me, which sort of ties
They
in a bit more
both
into
have it.
they
I
do
feel like
okay.
they both kind of, yeah.
Okay. But this one, at least with Walls of Jericho, it's again the string sections pop up a bit more, and there's some really
Hmm.
beautiful guitar work on here. And again, also sort of ties into, it just seems like he's just sort of walking on besides the ocean on the beach, just kind of reflecting about everything, and sort of deciding like do I want to even go home? Do I even want to deal with this? You know,
Yes, yes.
just sort of wanting to at this point sort of walk away from everything and just be like enough. And the Father Protect Me vocals are just again super haunting. Ties into the sort of the religious themes on this album a little bit, and just sort of again sort of begging to God like, hey, like please protect me during this like moment in my life. And obviously the
Hmm.
title Walls of Jericho, which again I also think about professional wrestler Chris Jericho, Y2J,
Yeah. I mean,
which
he has a tape called The Attitude Era, so I feel that he is a little bit of a wrestling fan too.
oh, Dean Blunt was totally an Attitude Era fan. Like he's totally an Attitude
Yeah.
Era fan. Like who, I mean, really, who wasn't at the time? But like
Yes.
he totally. Who is his favorite wrestler? Let's do some
Well, the
game theory on
pedigree,
this.
that's, maybe it was Triple H. Who
Oh my god,
knows?
I didn't even think about that shit.
Yeah.
And then the Demon Kane, like,
Yeah.
oh my
It,
god,
once again, see, it's another cryptic, that's another cryptic thing that he does once again.
this album is actually about the relationship or the affair of Triple H and Stephanie McMahon that
Yeah,
happened in
it's
the
it's
Attitude Era.
it's Dean Blunt being a fan of wrestling, and it's just his like hatred towards Vince McMahon as the years go on.
Okay. The next two tracks, Make It Official, Need to Let You Go, which I think are sort of a very yin and yang type of tracks where it's like Make It
Yeah.
Official is him like really trying to go for that sort of old R&B sound, like trying to be like all
Oh
sexy and
yes.
shit, and it's so cringeworthy, but it works so goddamn well. Like it's him like really putting on the schmaltz, and it's like, oh my god, dude, like Jesus
Yeah,
Christ.
he's like begging. He's almost like on his knees begging to make this work again or to get it, some other aspect, something fulfilled.
Hmm. I mean, I always kind of saw it as sort of the beginnings of the relationship in some ways, but I think now is like it can be kind of both. It's like it's maybe him sort of thinking about like, oh, the big like how the relationship began, like, hey,
Yeah,
let's make this official. But also
totally,
you can
totally.
interpret it as like also a bit like him trying to win her back a little bit, and like, hey, like let's make it official again, like let's do this. and
Yeah.
and because the way that the song ends, where it's like it's just 20 minutes of like dead silence, it sort of, I also kind of see it as more of like a dream state a little bit, and
Totally.
which leads into Need to Let You Go, which is again this really really rough sounding like Mellotron synthesizer that is just again
Hmm.
it's kind of at first kind of ear piercing a little bit, and then of course the horns, which sound like super out of tune, and Blunt's vocals, which are really distorted with
Yeah.
something, and again you kind of can barely understand what he's saying at times, and essentially the point of the track. It's Need to Let You Go. It's sort of him in his own sort of kind of hazy mind state, realizing like
Yeah.
stream of consciousness, and like, okay, I need to let you go. Like it's ended. I need to, being confused, and it's like this is the track
I
that
know what I did was wrong, still
Mhm.
more of that like self-guilt.
It's self guilt, but it's him. When he says stuff like but I know what I did was wrong. You sort of get that feeling of, does he believe what he's saying here? Like, does he fully realize that he did something wrong, or is he only saying he did something wrong because it'll make her happy, or at least he'll give her that sort of that satisfaction? Because it's like, shit, I've been there, man. Like I've told people I'm
Yep.
wrong, and then it takes like months to figure out, like, oh, I'm a fucking dumbass idiot. Why did I not
Yep.
realize this at the time? And
Yep.
again, this track is great, and then sort of leads into some more instrumental stuff for a little bit, for quite some time, and then but
Yeah,
then
I
some
think
voicemails.
yeah, Dread and Y3. Yeah, yeah.
And Dread is another voicemail, and sort of in almost way a polar opposite to the last one, where it's like, hey, stop calling me,
Mhm.
like stop behaving like an idiot. And uh, there's a line on here is that sort of pops up, I think, on the last voicemail a little bit, or at least sort of all you had to do was defend your girl, you know.
Yeah. Mhm. And I think, is this the one where she says you're the one who stood me up outside like
Oh
somewhere?
yeah, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Or yeah, I think this is the one, or it's the one after this.
Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure it's this is. I'm looking at the lyrics right now, and I'm pretty sure this is the one. Is there like four or three in because there's Predator, which is sort of the one that just hangs up pretty much.
Yeah, you have no more messages and all that.
Mm-hmm. But again, the picture on this is a bit more. It's it was already pretty bleak, but it's just way more bleak now.
Oh, yeah, there's no saving it now. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's done.
Mm-hmm. And then Y3, which is just like, again, sort of a bit more of a sparkling string section, and Blunt like trying his best to do this falsetto, and it sounds terrible, but again, it's compelling. It's terrible,
It's
but it works.
almost it's almost like he finished a sobbing episode and he was like, okay, I'm gonna lift myself up after having this sobbing episode in my shower.
Mm-hmm. And it's just like sort of laying on the simp mode a little bit, the gangster with a soft heart a little bit,
hmm
like,
hmm
hey, like I can be here for you, which again leads into Poppy, which is again super, again, incredible fucking track. The echo sample sounds amazing,
Oh
and
yes.
this one, it feels a bit more. It's still in that sort of that sad, pathetic, a little bit, but also like again very sadly relatable, where saying like, hey, you brought out the best in me, which you don't know is like looking at the relationship in rose tinted goggles, or just not realizing the bleak state of affairs. And it's just like
Or
saying like,
just realizing how bad he fucked up, you know?
mm-hmm. It's like, hey, like I felt like I was me the most with you, which is again, which let me remind you, that's a kind of a like not a good mind state to have, where you feel like you're your best person around, like your significant other. Like that's not the best
Yeah.
mind state to want to have. And this
hmm
song really represents that, but also again, very sadly relatable, because it's like shit, like yeah, like those were the times, and then of course with
Yep.
the end sample, where it's sort of counting down, like it's New Year's Eve, counting down to New Year's Day, which leads into MMIX, which is just
Yeah.
again the church bells, and let's tie it all back to those religious themes, baby. Let's get those church bells a
hmm
swinging. Let's again, it's a super ominous track. I mean, the end of Poppy is just leads into it perfectly, where it's just like such an immense set of dread
Yeah.
that leads in this track. And then um, All Dogs Go to Heaven, which has guitar work from let me see, from Alexander Olson, who again, this is a great instrumental track. Again, give you some more time
Yeah.
to reflect over everything, and it's the longest track on the album by a little bit, like
Five
clocking
and
in
a
over.
half minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful track. Like the strings sound great. Again, the guitar sounds great, and it's it's just a beautiful song, you know.
Yeah. It's a very pounding song. Once again, it kind of has this like almost lethargic kind of sense to it. You have this very heavy kind of looming bass and guitar over like these relentless drums, and it almost feels like Dean's kind of slogging through stuff and just kind of trying to push on.
Hmm. And then the next track, which is takes a little bit of a breather outside the narrative. It's pretty much the only track that's like outside of the narrative, which is it's a mostly sort of a folk song by
Yeah.
Joanne Robertson on vocals, and it just sort of seems like I've always interpreted it a little bit as sort of a singing by the campfire a little bit, with having Blunt with the guitar and
Yeah.
Joanne sort of singing this sort of what sounds like sort of an old folk standard. It just sort of sounds like, hey, like, hey, you're out on work and I'm back home. And
Yeah.
it's a really beautiful song. And I think it's sort of the last sense of the
Hope.
last yeah, exactly. It's the last hope in some ways.
Yeah. The lyrics are a little bit happier. They're like, "Oh, friends show you a good time." It still has that glimmer of hope.
Hmm. Which is immediately crushed with the next song, Predator, which again is another
Yeah.
voicemail where it's like, she's about to say something and she's like, never mind, hey, never mind, and then sort of the roboticized voice, roboticized.
Roboticize, I think, but
So
I don't
the
know.
pre-recorded message is saying like, hey, you can replay the message by pressing one, which leads into basically the last song on the album, Brutal, which,
Woo!
oh baby, um,
Yeah.
I I've said this album is my favorite of all time, and when I think of like what's like my favorite song of all time, like this is honestly the one that comes to mind for me. Like this is like the instant pop up, like, yeah, Brutal by Dean Blunt. Like
I
it's
will never forget the first time I heard this song. It just floored me. Like I was just like on the verge of tears just listening to this, and I wasn't even like in a relationship or got out of a relationship at the time. I was just like just heavily impacted by it. It's such a great fucking song.
and another samples like it samples a Mariah Carey track that samples Shook One's Part Two by Mobb Deep, which is again just a weird like sample chain. But
Yeah.
and you got to give a shout out to I'm gonna probably mispronounce this Len Sin Kung, who does the piano on this track, and it sounds amazing. And
Yeah.
the lyrics, it's sort of each sort of a break in the lyrics sort of represents like a different part of the getting over process. That first moment is, again, it's just depression. It's just like, hey,
Hmm.
you've gone away, but I'm still here.
Yeah.
I'm still alive.
You think you're better off, and all these like weird kind of like senses of anger almost, and he's very vindictive in this track.
It is the most pathetic song on this album, where it's him
Yeah.
trying to one up her, like, yeah, I'll be better without you, and the entire album, it just feels like he hasn't learned his lesson at all. Like
Yeah, yeah, he's still kind of like he kind of throws her away, and he's like, you gave your ass to someone else, and he's still kind of in this weird like objectifying sense, but he'll still just play the piano over it.
because I mean, at this point with a lot of breakup albums, you sort of expect the ending to be some kind, like there's some kind of closure, and this, you don't really get a sense of closure at all. He just feels like he's just sort of prefacing, like, yeah, I'm over you, yeah, I'll find someone better, like, you gave your ass to someone else, whatever, like, I
Yeah.
don't fucking care. And it's like, oh, he's not over her, like, this relationship, he's
Nope.
not over. And that's what makes this album and this song so goddamn compelling, because it's genuine. He's no,
Yeah.
it's no trying to rewrite some kind of revisionist history or trying to, it's brutal honesty. I think in a very
And
sort of
yes.
subtle and special way that a lot of breakup albums, even ones that I love, are not really able to sort of piece together.
Yeah, they still kind of have this uh sort of happy ending at the end. It's like, oh, I can move past this. And then here, that doesn't. This is the last track, so this is the last part you get, and there's even a part where he's like smoking and coughing, and it's just you just see how much of a bad state he's in after this, and there's no light at the end of the tunnel with this album.
And then of course the last track, Par, which is just again the voicemail again saying like, you have no more messages,
Yeah.
And in some ways, I feel like this album sort of ties into thinking like, is this album sort of like supposed to be in some ways kind of a voicemail to this girl, or again, I mean, just in general, it ties to all the voicemails from before from the girl, but it's just sort of him.
It's just a 44-minute long version of Marvin's Room.
Jesus Christ. But this album is again, it's 5 years later. It's still incredible from the first day I listened to it, and since then, I guess we can kind of talk a little bit about what Blunt's sort of done after this album a little bit. He did sort of a spiritual sequel or sort of a companion piece to this album, Stone Island, which is fantastic in its own ways.
Also very good, similar themes. Joanne Robertson once again on there. I think Heat is a track with her, and that's one of my favorite songs from her. Just oh my god, phenomenal folk song.
Mm-hmm. And it's one of the saddest fucking songs I've ever heard. Like, it's just so brutally sad. And the background of the album, it was recorded in a week in a Moscow hotel room and put out on like a Russian forum. So like the iTunes version that I have, which is now on Spotify, like a lot of his stuff got added to Spotify last year. Like the version I have.
I think it got added recently. Let me check.
I think it should be on there. Like my version on iTunes, it's all like the Russian track names. So
yeah, it's on Spotify now. Stone Island. Yeah.
Stone Island, and then after, I think, did Skin Fade come after Stone Island, or did Skin Fade come after Black Metal?
No, Skin Fade was after Stone Island.
Okay.
And before. Yeah.
And then so after sort of Stone Island, it's sort of again, Black Metal, which I've talked about before on the subreddit, and I talked about a bit in the FYC video. It was sort of this like really unique concept album about race that sort of kind of going back to Kanye a little bit, sort of ties into this whole what he was doing at the time with Yeezus, like wearing Confederate, having Confederate flag apparel and trying to reappropriate that. And Black Metal was him sort of seeing like, hey, like, I'm the black this, I'm the black that, and it's like, no, like, let's do something completely new and different. And Skin Fade was sort of a precursor to that style.
Yeah, I think Black Metal easily is my favorite album that has come out this decade. First time I heard it, and it's kind of divided into two sections, I would say. You have your first section where it's kind of like British, kind of Brit poppy, lad rock type, even folky stuff, where he's also rapping along to it and using rap lyrics and repurposing that. And then you have the second half, which is just experimental, kind of all over the place. You have noise, you have free jazz, you have reggae, and then just two at the end kind of grimy rap tracks. So this album kind of is a whole kind of comprehensive picture of who he is as an artist, in my opinion.
Yeah, like, I mean, this album, Redeemer, it's my favorite from him, favorite of all time. But, like, when you just get down to the nitty-gritty, like, his magnum opus it's Black Metal. Like, this is, like, it's the fullest realization that he's had as an artist. And it's sort of a sound, there's just a unique sound that he had on that album that he's not been able to he hasn't been able to fully recreate since. And it's sort of been the tougher part about being a Dean Blunt fan in these recent years. It's just been like, you made Black Metal, man. Like, the stuff is good, but, like, when are we gonna get Black Metal too, man?
And he kind of teases it. There's some tracks that he's released as one-offs, and in a description of, like, SoundCloud stuff, he'll be like, Black Metal 2 on the way, and I think he's kind of still fucking with all his fans, like, at that point.
Because, like, the last two things he put out was, like, a 30-minute long dark ambient piece, and then, like, a random, like, 3-track kind of, more electronic type stuff, and then there's the opera that did. I'm trying to remember, because I know the dark ambient one. I'm trying to remember the last one, like the
Buki,
yeah,
which kind of it kind of reminds me. It's kind of like sort of a throwback to his stuff because it's like kind of acousticy. singer, songwriter-y stuff, but it's not really focused on him as much as it is on like other stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, there's also the Blue Iverson mini album he
Yeah,
did, which
yeah,
was
Hotep, yeah,
which is basically more like Lauryn Hill. I mean, well, obviously with the Lauryn Hill on the cover of the album,
yeah,
sort of a throwback to that kind of style of music. And
yeah.
it feels
Almost
like,
reminded me of Sade too. Like, kind of
mhm.
gave me some vibes.
Oh yeah, and oh god. But Blunt, and as of recently, that was sort of the last two things he did was that like just, and also did like an opera recently that kind of
Yeah,
leaked out to the internet.
and of course, Baby Father, all that stuff.
Which is Babyfather done? Do you think? Like for me, it feels like BBF was sort of the peak. He still put out stuff since then as Babyfather, but I feel like, I mean, we haven't really heard anything about it since like 2017 or even like late 2016.
Yeah,
Like, I feel like he's sort of putting it to rest at this point.
he was touring it. I actually had the privilege of seeing him do a Baby Father set back in December in Houston, and it was a very just. I mean, that was the first time I ever saw him live, and besides that, I was losing my mind over it. But it was. It didn't seem like he was running out of steam with that. It seemed like he was in his kind of realm. He just kind of showed up, did his thing with like confidence and just like power, this swagger, and he stopped. He kind of just did his thing, showed up, didn't give a fuck, and then he left. And then that
Hmm.
was it.
Yeah.
So who knows?
So the future of Dean Blunt, is unknown. We were supposed to get black metal. That's the exciting thing about being a Dean Blunt fan is that you truly never know what he's going to do next. Like what he does.
Yeah.
Like one day you'll find out like, oh, he has new music out, and you're like, I have no idea what this is gonna sound like. I'm so excited.
You'd put it on and it'll still blow you away, for the most part.
For the most part, I mean, like, I wasn't expecting a dark ambient track from him. Like that was like, oh, this is what he's doing. Okay, cool. I'm into this.
Yeah.
But I feel like for me at least, like his peak years, that period of like 2012 to 2014, he was just doing so much incredible stuff.
Yes.
Which I think,
Absolutely.
which again, I think is just because, at least at that time, he was basically making pop songs pretty much, and
Hmm.
making really just incredible, lush, amazing pop music. And pretty much
Yes.
since then, he's sort of, Baby Father is obviously, it's hip hop and sort of, taking the piss in some ways out of UK rap and grime, and
Yeah, it's a very political record too, which is, it's very funny since that kind of came right before the Brexit stuff. So it's really funny to hear him kind of play on like nationalism and all this stuff and sort of civil unrest in the country. And then kind of after that comes out, oh shit, this whole crazy thing happens.
the album cover BBF by DJ Escrow, one of the greatest album covers of all time.
Yes.
I have it on vinyl. I literally only have it on vinyl because I needed to have that album cover. Like I just needed to hold it
Yeah.
in my hands and be like, this is real. He put out an album that had this cover, a fucking Union
Yeah.
Jack hoverboard over the London skyline. Like this is a beautiful piece of art. I
That's
respect him
just
forever for it.
it's beautiful.
It's the perfect culmination of like what the album is. It's just again taking the piss out of like British nationalism and the incoming Brexit and fucking Tories and shit. Like,
Yeah.
ugh. But
With like all drenched in this early 2000s uh, grime rap culture. It's almost like these British guys who were obsessed with like Dipset and Cameron. I believe Escrow kind of makes a reference to Cormega in one of his like kind of spoken word interludes, and it's just very interesting seeing that, as a avid fan of that era of hip hop. It's pretty funny.
I'm pretty sure that Blunt said in an interview, when he was a part of Hype Williams, that like he was friends with Cameron. Like I'm fairly certain because I mentioned it in my FYC video. Like I'm fairly certain that he said that at some point.
Yeah, yeah. And you can kind of see that in a few of the tracks in BBF.
Hmm. I mean, even in like the Redeemer and Black Metal, you just sort of still see that sort of that influence of like trying to be this sort of this gangster character with like at times a soft heart. Because I feel like on like almost all those
Yeah.
albums of the era, there's always like one or two like kind of R&B type tracks where they slow things down a little
Totally.
bit, and he reveals his heart out a little bit, and it's like it's kind of cutesy in a way. It's like, oh, He's not such a tough guy after all. He's a
Yeah,
bit of
he's
a
got a soft
softie.
spot. Yeah,
And I feel like a lot of the stuff they did in that, the 2012, 2014 era was like, what if that were like whole albums in some
yep.
ways? But
Oh yeah.
again, Team Blunt's great. The sound was great. Is there any sort of last thoughts? I think we kind of went through about. I think we said everything we wanted to say about this album
Yeah,
and
I
about
would say
Blunt.
that. I mean, this album is phenomenal, but I I think that there's so much more to check out from Dean Blunt. This is just kind of like scratching the surface on how great he is.
He has a lot of. There's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
There,
It's
it's
almost
a
like he
fucking
made this whole
wormhole.
universe.
You're not wrong because I feel like Dean Blunt, but he has this style that not a lot of artists have. Like there's no one.
Yeah.
There's artists that have sort of taken his influence over the years. Like I feel like his influence has only grown. Like I think recently with some of the obviously with ASAP Rocky, doing
Yeah,
a freestyle over meditation, and then
totally.
the ASAP Forever track, which those string sections, it's like
Oof.
it literally sounded like I know it's a Moby sample, but it's like that's something that it sounds like it could have come off like a Baby Father mixtape, like something off like Crying
Yeah.
in Tears, you know.
And I mean, I think another artist who has been in a similar vein and pretty much in the same timeline as him has been James Ferraro. I mean, he's kind of, if you hear NYC Hell 3 a.m. or even Skid Row, you get a lot of similar vibes from it.
I mean, they even did a collab album together,
Yeah, Watch the Throne, which
which
is such a funny name.
fucking great. And I mean, even Blunt himself again is the thing with Blunt, he's so compelling because I mean nowadays with the internet we're just getting so used to knowing everything about an artist before we even hear their music and like knowing who they are as people on social media and whatnot. But Blunt, there's such an aura of mystery behind him because we don't really know his
Yep.
past all that well. We don't
And
really
he
know what
doesn't
he's
want us
doing.
to.
Exactly, he doesn't want us to. And you really have to do like some deep digging to figure stuff out. And when you do, you go, "Oh, I don't know if I wanted to know that." I don't. But in some ways, that kind of makes this stuff more compelling because he's like trying to keep this stuff a secret. And it's stuff that's not even that embarrassing. It's just like there's the half the fun of being a Dean Blunt fan is the mystery behind him and like what he does. It's just like trying to figure out his
Absolutely.
moves because like one
Yeah.
moment he's saying like, "Oh yeah, I'm gonna do a short film." That's like a sequel to like some black exploitation movie from like the early 80s, late 70s. Like, yeah, I'm going to do
Yeah.
that. And then, of course, we don't hear a single thing about it. Like, hey, I'm going to do an
He'll just
art.
say he'll do it, and then that's it.
Yeah. Or like, oh, hey, I'm going to do an arts installation that's just like a stock photo and like an ear piercing sound.
Yeah.
Like, you guys like this
Or
shit?
he made a zine. Yeah, he made a zine where it's just receipts like of extravagant purchases at bars. It's like, oh, this guy bought 20,000 bottles at this bar in Milwaukee. Why don't I put the receipt in this in a zine and call it Ciroc Boys?
And it just again, Blunt, he's just got such a unique perspective on the current culture. Like I feel like, briefly getting into it, I don't want to get like too. I don't want to get too political, but
Yeah.
that he was also like 2 years ago on a Black Lives Matter UK panel that I think Boiler Room did, and raised some like really
Yeah.
unique points that really does tie into his musical stuff, especially black metal, where the whole point
Yeah.
talking about like, hey, just it's sort of there's just a fear of the black body, There's obviously a lot
Totally.
of underlying stuff, but like when it comes down to the surface level, like what is the base of everything? It's just people are afraid of the black body, straight up. It
Hmm.
just comes down to that. But seriously, Team Blunt again. Becoming a fan of him 2 years ago. I don't regret it for a second. It's a lot of fun because I feel like after I got Death Grips fatigue, like being a Death Grips fan for a couple years and whatever
Yeah.
after what happened with like Ginny Death and shit. I got some fatigue, I was just like I want stuff that feels like I feel like with Death Grips it started to get to a point, especially like with some of their outputs since Ginny Death, they've become a little bit too predictable. It's like, oh, yep, that's Death Grips, all right. But with Blunt,
Yeah.
I never really I do that with him, but it's like it's like, oh, no, it's Death Grips are doing that again, or they're up to no good. But Blunt's like, what the
Yeah.
fuck is he doing? This is great, but like,
See,
what the fuck?
I got into him, I think I want to say 2013, the year the Redeemer came out, and I was this was my freshman year of college, yeah. So I was having Kanye fatigue of a sort. I liked Jesus and everything, but it was kind of like his whole thing just really wasn't doing it for me. And I mean, it's kind of had a snowball effect ever since then. But, I got into Dean's music and I was like, oh, this is kind of what I wanted out of an artist. This is kind of pushing the boundaries of what music in the age of the internet can be and what it means to be an artist.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah,
Yep.
I think we've said it all.
Yep.
Hopefully you guys enjoyed this first episode of Indieheads Retrospect. More episodes on the way. We're playing out some stuff for this. There's a few albums. I think there's some stuff that we've been talking about for years that I feel like we can actually do with this series. Which I don't know if you're familiar, Armando, with some of the podcast lore. But we've been talking about, but like we have some Bruce Springsteen mega fans in the podcast, AJ
All
and
right.
Jeremiah,
Hell yeah.
and they've been talking about doing a Border Run podcast for like 2 years now, and they've never done it.
There you go.
And it's like, fucking, this is the time. So
Yeah.
yeah, thank you once again for coming on doing this podcast with me. Again,
Thank
I
you for having me.
had a great time talking about this album with you. Finally, someone
Yep.
understands and gets it. And,
Hell yeah.
Hey, if you're not listening to Dean Blunt, go listen to Dean Blunt and go listen to The Redeemer. It's a great album.
And his other stuff.
And his other stuff.
And his other stuff.
Other stuff. And his other stuff. Again, there's a lot to dig into. I recommend going
Yeah.
to the Dean Blunt subreddit. There's a lot of. They have a good like a sort of a good biography, and I think they have like archive links of everything. And I feel like if you want to like, hey, like, how do I get a Dean Blunt? Like, that's a good place to go to. Or you can
Totally.
just ask me or Armando, because we can also
Yep.
guide. We can also be your guides on this fucked up Union Jack hoverboard that we call being a Dean Blunt fan.
Yes.
So yeah. Once again, thank you,
All right.
Armando. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you.
Make sure to keep listening to his podcasts. Give us a review on iTunes. Subscribe to us on YouTube. Follow us on Twitter. All that stuff. It's in the description. Follow Armando on Twitter. Semi-interesting. Follow him all his stuff. And yeah.
Woo.
Bye, guys.
See you.